Hi, I'm Donna, host of the Better to Burnout podcast. Needom is my pen name that I use for writing my books in the Better to Burnout series. The reason I decided to call this the Better To podcast, besides the fact that that's my series name, is the fact that back in December I was posed a question about fear, and I chose the topic of fear of dealing with a terminally ill person. When my husband and I first got together, he tried pushing me away, chasing me away, telling me he wasn't healthy and he would have problems and he wasn't going to live that long. Fortunately, I had him for 16 years. However, I told him when he was trying to chase me away that it was better to love him and lose him than never to have loved at all. Yes, I know it's cliche. But after that podcast in December, I started indexing Better To. And after the sixth page on Google, I stopped because there's so many iterations of it, including somebody that wrote, "It's better to be single and flirt than to be tied down." So, on that note, I decided, you know what? What if I took a moment in someone's life and said, "Hey, let's examine that. And let me ask you, was it better to have done this or do you regret it? And let's explore." In all fairness, that's putting a person on the spot, and I will be doing that. But in all fairness, as I said, it would be best if I did it first. So I sat here and I thought of many things I could analyze. And I decided to dig deep because this year is 30 years. Or actually, it's 30 years since my mom passed it this November. And there's a story to it. And if my story can help somebody else analyze and figure things out, then it's worth telling. So, what I want to explore today started back in 1985. It was right after Valentine's Day, and it deals with my mom. You would think that that would be the simple answer. That would be the place to start. And for me at that time, I was 17 years old. I was in my senior year in high school. Life was good for the most part. Um, but my mom had gotten remarried back in 83. And she thought this person loved her emphatically, and we were going to have this Brady Bunch life, and everything was going to be perfect. So they had been together a little bit over a year and a half, almost 2 years. And Valentine's Day rolled around. So Valentine's Day rolls around, and things seem okay, at least at our house, for the most part. My stepbrother is living with us, which that was fine. We got along great. But somehow around this time, I don't know how many days after this was, after Valentine's Day it was, but my mom, and I've done some writing about this too. So, I mean, there are blog posts out there. But, so my mom and my stepfather had a fight. Pretty bad fight, actually. And there was a lot of screaming, a lot of yelling. And it's like, you realize there's certain highlights that you remember. So my mom was yelling at my stepfather. At the time, I wasn't fully sure why. Um, she ripped open a bag of candy hearts, those little conversation hearts, and threw them at him. And she picked up she had a big brandy sniffer that she had made in the late 70s of a sand garden with little figurines and stuff in it, and she threw that at him. So that broke. And somehow in their argument, nothing got really physical. I mean, as far as nobody hit anybody, it just was, let me throw shit at you. She knocked over the dog's water bowl. So now we have a mess of glass, and we have dogs, yes. So there's a mess of glass. There's a mess of these conversation hearts. There's the sand. All this is forming a nice mix on the floor. And, really when I think about it, it was kind of a metaphor. So they fought, and, finally when we heard part of the argument, this was all done, our family room and kitchen were kind of together. So there was a pass through, and all this was right by the entrance to the kitchen and the family room. And the garage was right off of there. So, as this argument proceeds, it comes to find out that my stepfather had sent his ex-wife a dozen roses and got my mom nothing. So my mother was livid. Now, there's some history about my mom that at the time, I didn't know. And it's funny because I was having a discussion with somebody the other day about the fact that when you're living things, you don't recognize certain aspects of a person as abuse. You just live it. That's your life. You don't realize that they're abusive. And I mean, we're not here to talk about that, but it's the fact that you don't recognize this. So at 17, this is the norm. I mean, my mom eventually would be diagnosed after her death in her conversations with people in the professional industry as bipolar. And I've done a lot of analyzing and thinking about things, and she had a lot of issues, and I don't fault her because she never got the help. But I digress. Anyway, so she's living, and they went in their bedroom, which was common, and they're arguing, and apparently she took some medication. Things quieted down, and medication, I'm not meaning medication for her problem, because she wasn't taking any medication for that. She just took some pills. So I started cleaning up the mess. My stepbrother and I were kind of mortified at what was going on. We didn't know what to do, what to say. I mean, what do? You turn the TV on, you sit there after the mess is cleaned up. I fixed dinner for us, and, that was about it. My stepfather came out. He didn't say much. He's like, oh, everything's fine. Okay, fine. So he went back in the room, and my stepbrother and I spent the evening watching TV and trying to be okay. Also, at this point, before they went into the bedroom, my mother gave me a letter, and she gave Roger a card, and it was basically a goodbye letter, which, this is unnerving. This is unnerving, and then the stepfather to come out and tell you, oh, everything's fine. So go to bed. I'm 17. I'm trying to process all this. I don't understand what's going on. Really, I don't. And I know you would think at 17 you should know these things, but I didn't. So the next morning, my mom gets up, and I had hurt myself earlier that year at school, or the year before. It was actually the year before. And I had some Tylenol 3 in my medicine cabinet, and my mom raided my medicine cabinet. She took that, and God knows what else she took prior to that. And she went in the bedroom again. And then she came out of the bedroom, and she got in her car. But the garage door closed, and she went to start the car. And I'm pleading with her. I'm like, Mom, don't do this. Mom, just don't do this. Whatever, nothing is worth doing. Your life matters. Don't do this. And she looked at me, and she's just like, just go away. I'm like, no. I said, I'm going to call the paramedics to come get you. And she said, if you save me, I'll never forgive you. So I had to make a decision at 17 to have my mother hate me or save her life. And that's my moment, at least here today, that I want to discuss. Was it better to have made that phone call than not? I'll examine that in a minute. So I did make the phone call. I made the phone call, and she got out of the car when I made the phone call, and she went in the living room. And by the time the paramedics got there and the police, she was in the formal living room, and she was nearly passing out. So of course all the neighbors are out. They're trying to keep my mom lucid. They're trying to talk to her. They load her into the ambulance, and I tell my stepfather to go. Roger and I will be there shortly. At 17, to be able to know that I had to do this, I had to grab my stepfather, I had to be, lock up the house. I had to make sure all this stuff was done. I don't know how I did it. I really don't. But looking back at me at 17, I was pretty strong. And that's something my mom wanted. Anyway, so we walk out the house, and of course all the neighbors are there. My mom's already been taken away, and one of the neighbors has the nerve to come over and say, so what's wrong with your mom? Okay, so this is the 80s. This is the 80s. And the last thing you're going to say, this is the early 80s at that. Like I said, 1985, so mid. But the last thing you want to do is tell somebody because, there's a stigma. There's a stigma so bad that, it, you know, if I say that my mom tried to kill herself, how do you tell people that? How do you deal with that? So in the split second, I just looked up and said, "Oh, my mom had a reaction to something. She had some kind of bug or virus, and she was throwing up. So, they're taking her to the hospital because she wasn't feeling good." It makes no sense. And do I regret saying that? Yeah, but also it was none of their business. So anyway, so we rush to the hospital. We drive to the hospital, and she gets there before us, of course. And when I see my stepfather, he's out in the waiting area. And it's an hour or so before they actually let us see her. And when we do see her, she's been intubated. She has black all around her mouth from where they pumped her stomach. And they tell us we're not sure. We're not sure if she's going to make it. Okay. And seeing her in that position was terrifying. Like I said, I'm 17. All of a sudden, my mom and I weren't besties, but seeing her hooked up to that machine and the black around, I will always remember that black around her mouth. And it's something that rips at you, it tears at you because this is somebody that is supposed to love you, that's supposed to be there for you. And for lack of a better way to put it, they basically said, fuck you. So at least, at 17, this is how you interpret it. You can't figure out what the hell's going on. Why would she do this? Why would a man make her do this? So she was in a coma for 3 days. When she came to, of course, they put her in a psychiatric ward. You would hope, you would hope that the doctors would recognize that there was a problem here, that there was a situation that she needed to continue with mental health hygiene, that she needed a therapist. No. And she was damn proud of the fact that she conned the doctors. She was like, "Oh, I told him I was burned out. Everything's fine. Everything's good." And, there you go. So she got out. She was fine. That's what they said. And she wasn't. She wasn't. And then she proceeded to add insult to injury because when she did talk about this, which wasn't very often, but when she did talk about this, she proceeded to tell everybody how my stepfather saved her. I didn't. He did. And looking back, I think she needed to hear that. I think she needed to hear that he saved her for her mental status. And the fact is, he didn't show up until the first paramedics pulled in the driveway. When the paramedics pulled in the driveway, he came out of the room before they entered the house. So in her mind, he saved her. So now, here comes the question. Do I regret saving her? Ultimately, in November of 1991, she ended up completing her mission. And there was a long road to get there between her and I. A long road of her threatening, I can't tell you how many times she was going to do it. And she would, I'm going to kill myself. Okay. Why? And you'd have the conversation and you talk to her and you'd go, okay, this is not worth it. If I fast forward to 1991 in the story, of course, going backwards, in June of that year, my stepfather had moved to Indiana and my mom was living in Shreveport. And I was living in Dallas. And she came over for a visit and she seemed to be okay. And she wasn't really happy though. I mean, she seemed to be okay. And okay for her was pleasant. So she came over and I'm like, leave him. I was living with my first husband at the time and we had his 2 kids with us. We weren't married. That's a whole nother story. But anyway, she she came over and I'm like, look, we'll figure something out. Move in with us. Screw this. Your life is worth more than whatever your fear is. And that had a lot to do with it. It was fear with money. And she had a big fear about money. Because apparently at the time they had gotten, besides moving, he had redone a pickup truck. And so she was worried because they didn't have the money to pay for it. And this truck had been his forever. And he had redone it like 3 times. This was like the third time he was redoing it. So she had been waiting on a court case because she had hurt herself and the court case didn't go well. And so that June, end of May, I saw her. And then beginning of June, she came over and saw me. And the beginning of June, after she went back home, the phone call started. The phone call every day of, I'm going to kill myself. And she wouldn't only do this to me, she did it to my grandmother. And both of us tried to talk to her. I took it upon calling my stepfather's job and talking to the dispatch to tell them I needed to talk to him. That way, when she moved, or even before she moved, he could get her help. Because there was nothing really I could do at that time. Nobody was going to listen to me. So I called him. I told him she needed help. I told him what she was threatening. She continued to do this. There was one time when 2 days passed and we didn't hear a call. My grandmother and I were panicked because did she actually do this? So then, near the end of June, she made a call that was tantamount to mental cruelty for what she wanted me to do. And that was, people would say there's no way somebody could ever do this. But my mother, who was very much the neatnik, she called me and she says, I want you to come over from Dallas and I want you to come in the master bedroom and walk into the bathroom and you'll find me in the standing shower. I'm going to shoot myself in the head. And that way it won't be so much messy. It'll be all contained in the shower. But I need you to come find me. And I remember thinking, this is insane. This is preposterous. How the hell could you do this? And so I said to her, I said, if you loved me, you wouldn't ask me to do this. If you loved me, you wouldn't leave me scarred like this. And she was quiet for a minute. And then she said, yeah, I guess you're right. I guess you're right. I shouldn't ask you to do that. I'll ask one of the neighbors. So I talked to my husband. He's like, oh, don't worry about it. She's just blowing smoke. She's just, she's not going to do it. Okay. And at that point, I was, I've been traumatized for almost a month now, every day of hearing this. And you, as panicked as you are initially, you start to get worn down and desensitized, and you're just like, how do I deal with this? So fast forward, she apparently did shoot the bookcase, and she went to shoot herself in the head in the living room, and she shot a bookcase because there was evidence of a bullet hole in a bookcase. And she told me that she lost her hearing in one ear because of it. So then everything seems fine. She moves to Indiana. Everything seems fine. I'm planning my wedding. She's all excited about my wedding, talking about my wedding and everything else. And then one day in November, the beginning of November, she calls and she talks to me and she tells me how she can't take it anymore. And I'm trying to get her help. I'm trying to talk her down again. As always, I'm telling her, look, don't do this. I love you. I need you. Grandma needs you. You can leave the son of a bitch. You don't need to stay. You can have a different life. This being said, at the time, my stepfather had given her an allowance of $5 a week. So he was manipulating her in a way. I mean, I hate to say it, but I warned him that she was capable of this. And, well, she ended up calling my grandmother after me, and she talked to her, and then she called me back. And the very last thing my mother ever said to me besides, I love you, was to have a nice wedding. I got off the phone with her and I kept trying to call, and I never got through. Never, ever did I get through. And I called my husband and I told him, he's like, oh, don't worry about it. She'll be fine. Mind you, I'm in Dallas and she's in Indiana. I keep trying to call her phone. Nothing. So then he comes home and I just know at my core that this time it's different. This time it's for real. And, I talked to my grandmother and she's beside herself and she's got a freaking heart problem. So this is not good for her. So my mom, the next morning I receive a call. I had woken up. Things seemed okay. And I mean, I can remember exactly that day because I went to rewind a VHS tape that I had taped the night before, and the girls were in their room playing. We had already eaten, and the phone rang, and I turned the TV off and I turned the tape off because I knew. And I remember my stepfather telling me, "She's gone," and sliding down to the floor and bawling my eyes out, and my kids running in, my stepkids. And the interesting thing about this, it goes back to feeling out the situation. The kids were 5 and 7. How do you tell a 5 and 7-year-old who look at this lady as their grandmother? How do you tell them that she did this? You don't. At least not then. It was too much. It was like, okay, well, your grandmother was cleaning up something, and a gun fell off and just happened to hit her in the right place and killed her. I mean, looking back, it was the stupidest excuse you could ever do or ever tell. But the excuses had to keep coming because there's no way I wanted to tell my grandmother over the phone what happened. So my husband and I flew up to Indiana and we waited for the ashes. And while we're waiting for the ashes, my grandmother called one night to my mom's. She had called several times. She had been calling my house several times. And the only thing I could think of, and I spent an hour on the phone with her that night. And because I had called her back and I'm like, hi. And she's like, I've been calling you. Where have you been? And I'm like, I'm over at, my in-laws house. Our heater went out. So I'm over at my in-laws house. And, we're just, I'm sorry I haven't called you back. It's just been crazy. Well, I've been trying to call your mom. Yeah, I'm sure she's just out on the road with Shelly, because sometimes she likes to do that, which was true. Sometimes she did go out on the road with my stepfather. He was a truck driver. And so I proceeded to lie to my grandmother for an hour, and she seemed to buy it. 2 days later, we were knocking on her door to tell her the truth, and it devastated her. And she every anniversary, every birthday of my mom's and her death day, my grandmother would sit there and say that she didn't do it. The thing about this, the one thing, these are little pieces of information before I finally give my summation here. The thing about it is, when I was flying up to Indiana, I called my dad. I called my dad to tell him what happened. And my dad tells me, well, your mom tried it many a times. But he didn't believe she did it because this time it was with a gun and not pills, because my mother was too vain to shoot herself. That was what he said. So that made me think back when I was on the plane of a time right after they split and we came home from Mardi Gras, him and I. And he had a girlfriend and he came to drop me off. And mom was nowhere around. So he went in the bathroom. I don't know. I didn't see her. And came out, called my grandmother, and shoved me out the house. I would see my mom in the hospital a couple of days later. So I know he didn't lie about that. So I think my mom had this. This was a mission, whether she had postpartum and was never diagnosed and it just blossomed. I don't know. She had me when she was 18 years old, almost 19. So actually she was 19. I don't know. I mean, I can't go back and analyze her. You know, when I sit there and look at her parents, my grandparents weren't the same people that were her parents. At least my grandmother wasn't, I'm pretty sure. But my grandfather was a drinker. He was not there for her. I don't know what happened to her. And, after 30 years, I can finally sit here and look at it and go, well, she is the sum of all things she went through. She is that person that experienced her own life. I mean, her lessons made her who she is. So when I pose the question to myself, knowing all these little puzzle pieces, do I regret my choice of saving her? Because ultimately she ended up doing it anyway. And during that time period, we didn't necessarily have the best relationship. And my answer would be yes. No. My answer would be no. I don't regret saving her. Would I have liked to have had a better relationship with her? Yes. Would I have hoped she would have gotten better mental health care? Yes. The reason I don't regret saving her, I mean, I know some people are like, well, you said yes initially. I would say yes because she wouldn't have had to have those 8 years of suffering of the head games. But in all honesty, if I look at it from my perspective, if if I would not have made that call and I would have let my mom die when when I was 17, my life would have completely changed. I wouldn't be the person that's sitting here right now in front of you in my closet, because that's really what's behind me. Um, I would not have experienced everything. Because I chose to make that decision, I helped her live. I helped her have a little bit longer life. Do I wish she would have lived longer than 1991? Sure. Would it have been nice to have my mom around, even if we didn't have the best relationship? Yeah, it would have. But the fact of the matter is, the relationship had a shelf life, like most do. I don't regret saving her. And if I really step back and look at it, if I didn't make that phone call, and this is one thing about, we can say the butterfly effect or whatever. If I hadn't made that phone call to save her, I wouldn't have done half the things in my life. I most likely would have went back to New Orleans. And going back to New Orleans would have completely changed my life. Because I saved her, a friend and I won a trip to Live Aid. Because we won the trip to Live Aid, I met one of my first roommates. And I moved in with her, moved out of my house. Because I chose to save her, I continue to grow as a person. I had the gumption to move to Dallas to explore my life. I've moved several places. And I go back to, and I found this letter several times over. At freshman orientation at my all-girl Catholic high school, Archbishop Blank, which no longer exists, she had to write me a letter for freshman orientation. Everybody's parents had to. My dad didn't, but my mom did. And the basic principle of the letter, the very end statement of what this letter was, you know, that she believed in me, that I could do things because I was strong. And she said, I may not be the mother you need or want, but I want you to be a strong woman. And looking at my life and a lot of things that I've gone through, which I'm not going to sit here and play victim, because everything that I've gone through and experienced in my life has made me who I am. And I've had people go, oh my gosh, no, it's just my life. And I'm thankful in a way to have had her, because she made me stronger. Would it have been nice am I envious of people that have relationships with their mom, that they're their best friend? Sure. Sure, because that is something special. But in the same token, when I watched my husband die last year, as freaked out as I was and everything, and as upset as I was and terrified, and I still have my moments, I knew I knew I'd make it through. I knew I wouldn't let the grief overcome me, and I wouldn't let it dictate my life. When my mom died, I was a mom with two small kids, and my dad was dating somebody, and my dad fell off the wagon, and she ended up shooting herself in the stomach. And he didn't tell me; she told me. She did it like 3 months after my mom did it. So it it became a very murky time, because it's like, why would you do this? And part of it was because she wanted my dad's attention, because my dad was already stepping out and my dad moved on with somebody else. So she figured if she did this, then she could get his attention. Most suicide attempts are that cry for attention. But that being said, there are other things at play sometimes. You know, was my mom's a cry for attention? No, I don't believe it was. After a certain point, it wasn't. After a certain point, she wanted to end it because she was miserable. Um, I had gone to a group therapy session about grief after my mom's death, and this husband and wife had lost their daughter, and they summed up, while it's awful, they summed up suicide beautifully. And it was that their daughter was on a mission. When I look at my own mom, she was. She was on a mission. There was no ifs, ands, buts about it. So as I wrap this up, if you are thinking, or you feel like you're not, that life's not worth living, don't feel that way. Because as I would tell my mom, every day life changes, and you have to find a way to keep going. You have to find a way to push through if you can, because you don't know what may come along the next day. You know, um, there was a time when, not too long ago, that I was put on Cymbalta for fibromyalgia, and I was on it for a couple of days, and I started having these really dark thoughts. I had these thoughts of um, that I wasn't worthy, that my husband would be better off without me. And after 2 days of this and really thinking about it, I'm crying, and I told John, and it dawned on me that this wasn't me. This was the medication. So if you're on medication, I mean, my husband was on some medication for neuropathy, and he started having dark thoughts. And sure enough, the medication had a black box warning. If you're having these thoughts and you know that this is foreign to you, and you feel like you're drowning, and you feel like you're overwhelmed, reach out to somebody. I don't care who it is. Suicide is something serious. And while we all have our moments of darkness, everybody does. I mean, when I was 19, I did. I was not suicidal, but I felt like everybody had killed me because life just was so dark. But if you ever get to that point, know that there are people that care. You know, the process of losing my husband this past year with COVID, it's been a very solitary thing. I've had a couple of friends that have been by my side. I mean, not physically, but I can reach out and call them. And those few friends, they're important to me, because they let me talk, they let me share, and they've helped me get through this. And the one thing I would say to anybody that is experiencing, whether it's grief, loss, or you even feel like, life isn't worth living, that, oh my gosh, my finances are so screwed that, life isn't, that was my mom a lot too, that life is not worth living because money. Here's the thing. Do you have your health? Do you have people that care about you? Money it's a nice thing. Don't get me wrong. It's a nice thing, but don't let it rule you. Appreciate the people you have, appreciate your health, appreciate your body, appreciate the sun in the sky. I mean, I was married to a man who was legally blind, and coming home, I could see the sunsets, the beautiful colored sunsets, and he couldn't. He couldn't see so many things. and my dad now can't hear. So appreciate what you have, because you never know when what you have isn't going to be there. But appreciate the people in your life too, because honestly, so what if he broke up with you or she broke up with you? There's always other fish in the sea. It doesn't matter. Own yourself. Own own your happiness. I'm not saying, and I don't want people to misconstrue this. I'm not saying that depression isn't real, because it is. It's very real. Anxiety is very real. But find a way to work through it. I'm not going to say it's all going to be, beer and Skittles or whatever. Anyway, who would eat beer and Skittles? That just sounds nasty. But anyway, you you can have another day, a better day. If you would have told me, if I could go back and tell that 17-year-old self that your mom's going to do it anyway, the only reason I would do that is to prepare her. So when the phone calls start, she understands. So she can do what she needs to do. I wish I could have saved her, but I couldn't. And with that statement, there is a lot of guilt tied to that. At least there used to be. So whether you're a survivor or somebody who's done it, if you're a survivor, you understand that, the guilt and how you feel helpless. But after a certain point, it heals. And if you're in a dark place, reach out. Somebody will be there for you. I will put at the end of the video the suicide hotline, and, you know, reach out. Mental health is not as stigmatized as it was when my mom was going through all this. Mental health is important. And, I'll be honest. Yeah. Do I see a therapist? Yeah. Have I seen a therapist for a long time? Yeah. And you want to know irony? After my parents split, my mom made sure I went to therapy. She made sure I had a therapist. Yet she never got one. Maybe things would have been different had she. So, anyway, this is the start of the Better To podcast. I hope you got something from it. I hope it gave you some thought-provoking information. And we'll continue on. Next time, I'll have a guest. And that guest will be Sarah Martucci, and she will be talking about coming out as a psychic medium, which should be interesting. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Take care, and I look forward to talking with you again. Bye.